Hello and welcome to Cinema Subculture, the channel where we discuss everything strange, obscure, and downright messed up in the world of movies. My name's Gary.
And I'm Simon. So, Gary, what film are we here to chat about today?
Weekend, a 1967 film directed by Jean-Luc Godard. The film follows a French bourgeois couple as they take a trip to the country to collect inheritance money, scheming against each other on the way. The film is a fierce critique of French middle-class culture and marked a significant break in Godard's filmmaking, being his last mainstream narrative film of the 1960s before he embarked on a more political style of filmmaking.
Cool. So, this was your kind of recommendation coming off the back of our Halloween triple bill, which was a lot of fun for you. Um, so, what's your thoughts in this film? Let's come to you.
Okay, I think this is one of the few Godard films that would fit into the kind of categories that we talk about on this podcast channel. So I thought this would be an interesting one to look at. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Jean-Luc Godard, especially his 1960s work. Anything he made after the 80s, I'm not that into, but I'm aware of the fact that maybe Godard's filmmaking, especially his more political stuff that he did in the late 60s, is kind of appeals to quite maybe a niche sensibility that is actually right up my street. If you are a fan of kind of formal innovation, sort of Brechtian modernist film techniques, socialist slash Marxist politics, a kind of literary and political denseness in terms of references, stuff like that. And this film particularly, ticks all those boxes and is one that maybe appeals to me. But obviously, for I think a mainstream casual film audience, this film might be kind of unwatchable. There's even sections that I think are quite boring, but I think that's kind of strangely intentional. Um, but I think this film in particular, I love the kind of, it's got a mix of farcical kind of comic humour mixed with a kind of a darkness underneath. The political and literary allusions. Sort of film is quite prescient in terms of the coming political sort of cultural revolutions that were coming in France at the time, the hippie movement and the student uh, rebellions of 1968. Yeah, I just kind of smile all the way through this, and it's just such an idiosyncratic work that I don't think any other filmmaker would put all those things together that this film ends up being. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of this one.
Cool. Um, I didn't enjoy this one.
Okay.
I don't know if it was the frame of mind I was in to start watching this film, but I found it really aggravating.
Mm,
Right? Um, from a lot of different points of view, and let's go back. Let's take a few steps back. I think it's amazingly shot a lot of the times. I think it looks really spectacular for the whole run of the film. I think the performances are great. I think some of the kind of meta commentary, the characters talk about being in a film and stuff like that. It's really interesting, and the darkness is and the comedy is played so like intertwines so well that you can't sometimes tell until you're kind of the punchline comes when you're not expecting it. Sometimes I'm thinking of for example, the traffic jam scene, with it crosses over to being so aggravating and so like, why isn't this fucking done yet?
right.
This scene with these horns, and then it literally, much like the characters are meant to are feeling, and the kind of apathy towards what happens when you get to the head of the traffic jam and why there's a traffic jam at all. There's like dead bodies strewn all over the place, including children, and people just walking around as if nothing's going on.
Mm,
There's a school trip across the street just walking about. And you're like, oh right, okay, like that, so it's quite and you're like, okay, they're taking the piss here, but I don't know, for some reason the comedy, like, I could see why it was meant to be funny, but it just wasn't necessarily landing for me because I was so
Right.
ticked off at the time.
Okay.
Like by the time I got there, like it was like you know what I mean, and like the scene up near the beginning with I think it's the main actress because I kind of lost a little bit at the beginning with the male actor who it was because he's off screen a lot,
Right.
especially early on in the
Yeah.
car scenes. Like he's kind of almost like so the camera's just on her and he's talking, they're having a conversation. But anyway, early on when in the kind of darkened room and she's talking about this sexual encounter or dream or nightmare, whatever it is, the music starts to swell
Mm.
and kind of you're like, wait, am I supposed to? And then like, what I mean, so like, how does that work for someone who's not watching this film with subtitles for like a natively French speaking person? Like,
Right.
I'm thinking like, are we meant to? Because it's almost like, are we meant to hear what the character's saying? And there were definitely times when you couldn't hear it clearly and there was no subtitles. But then there were times where you could just about hear it, maybe, and there was subtitles. So maybe that's what they're going. But anyway, I was like, why is this doing? It was giving me flashbacks to the child. The music, the kind of like the music design. Like, why are you doing this? Like,
Mm.
I'm kind of into this scene. It's quite a cool looking scene. I'm like, I can
Right.
hardly see the characters. It's really an interesting thing. What she's describing is very, like, it's quite a cool imagery and like the way that they are painting this like overtly sexual scene and potentially kind of abusive scene, you can't quite tell, is really cool the way they're doing it with these two characters with in this darkness. And then they start, sorry, I'm getting so animated, I'm throwing my mouse about. Then they start like interrupting the characters with the music and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know, my brain kind of didn't know what to be listening to or watching because
Right.
there wasn't really much to see, but it was almost like he was really getting away with it because of what was being described and the way that it was being done. But then it was just like, I get that maybe that's what he's going for, but it just came across a little bit as, oh, he doesn't give a fuck what these people are saying.
Right.
That way he's kind of interrupting them, and it's like, I don't know what I'm meant to be getting from the scene when it appears that the filmmaker or the music isn't respecting the scene in any not in any manner, but to just randomly swelling. And he does it later on in the film as well, quite a few times.
Mm.
But yeah, a lot of this it just rubbed me the wrong way.
Right. Okay.
I didn't get a lot of the I knew that it was being political, and I knew some of the not necessarily quotes, but some of the people that were being spoken about in the quotes and things, and I got that stuff, but I wasn't familiar enough with the stuff with the quotes or with the actual the history of it, and what was going on in France at the time to get enough of that from that for me.
Mm.
So in that way, I don't know. I don't know if that does that make it dated. I don't know, like the fact that like you'd have to know, but then I don't know. Maybe it's just my limited like political knowledge, right? Like,
Yeah, well, I'd say the references are so dense. There's so many of them, and they're not really that well attributed. And I wouldn't say that I knew everything that was being referred to.
sure.
I've got a kind of I'm quite a political into politics and socialism, so I've got a kind of understanding of kind of history of socialist thought a wee bit, and that was the path that Godard was going down in the late '60s, get more and more radicalised for left wing politics. It's an interesting one because a lot of the intention of this movie is to antagonise the audience. So I don't think your reaction is unfounded. And I think that would probably be most people's reaction to it. So I don't know if my reaction is a kind of slightly, I can take a kind of smug, intellectual, oh yes, very good, Jean-Luc, yes. I see how you're trying to piss off the mainstream there. Despite I can't hear what these characters are saying because of music. But
you're like
yeah.
Come at me, bro.
So I don't know if it's that, but I don't know. You know me, like I love a film that can surprise me and be unpredictable. If I don't know where a film is going, I love that. Having seen so many films and you've seen all the patterns and you can kind of know usually where stories are going. I love things that break the rules. that challenge an audience, piss off an audience, just shock me, surprise me, and this film is full of them. But yeah, I can see those techniques of what you might call distancing kind of effects would piss people off, and they're kind of meant to do that. It comes out of the ideas of Bertolt Brecht. You familiar with Brecht? Very influential in this style of kind of art house filmmaking. Brecht was a German playwright, a Marxist who came up with ideas about how to revolutionize the theatre and to create techniques that would, challenge an audience to stimulate them in a political way. So rather than you're watching a play or a film and it's a version of reality, as normal film models are, what Brett said, the problem with that is you just watch a film and you forget about it. He wanted to challenge the audience so that they're aware they're watching a film or a movie or a play in his case. Therefore, you have a more radical reaction to it, so you may potentially become politicized, and you actually start thinking about what you're watching more than just a kind of passive story being told at you. So that's where a lot of those ideas come from, and Godard was really embracing that here. But I think there's even sections. There's a section where there's the sandwich eating section. You have two characters eating sandwiches, and they're giving you a kind of political treatise to do with like imperialism, the exploitation of Algeria and the global south by Western powers, and it's just shot with a character talking straight to camera. Not even the character, like
no,
it's the opposite character, to the one talking. And I mean, is it boring? I'm fine. I don't have a problem with saying that. But it's interesting when it goes to the next scene. The essay lecture kind of continues, where we go back to the two main characters, Corinne and Roland, the couple, and they're just watching the camera, and they look completely bored as well. With it. So there's a kind of like tongue-in-cheekness that Godard has, I think, with what he's doing there.
I really like that part, because it was like the characters, even though the characters up to that point had been not very necessarily likable characters, Corinne and Roland, they were like almost like this kind of, we know we should listen to this. We know we know we should we've got to be respectful here. We should be listening to this. That was the kind of look they had on their face. It's like, this is really, it is boring, but like we need to pay attention here. It was kind of interesting. It was almost like mirroring the way, like maybe how you're describing, even like the audience is meant to feel. And like, this is important. We shouldn't, even though we're not wanting to be listening to this right now, as something that maybe needs to be said by these characters, whatever. But yeah, I did quite enjoy that.
Right, okay. Yeah, it is a film that's hard to follow. I watched it twice. I mean, I've already seen it like 2 or 3 times in the past. It is kind of hard to get a grip on what's happening. So much in it, like for a 100-minute film. Basically, we just get the main couple go through the countryside, and they have these sort of episodes of meeting these characters. It could be characters from history or literature. And they just encounter this sort of violence and savagery and arguments and strange things. And
so many car crashes.
Right.
Jesus Christ. I thought that's something I was watching a zombie apocalypse film or something.
Right.
There's so many car crashes.
Yeah, and I think the point is, I think the sort of thrust of the film is about how this sort of civilized couple is sort of traveling back to a kind of barbarous, kind of savage state of nature, and a sort of a criticism of how that sort of barbarism inherent in the sort of middle class culture that Godard is trying to critique here. But I think the thing is, like, they're just completely bored by everything in the movie. And at the end, the sort of last section, they sort of get kidnapped by a kind of band of terrorists.
Cannibal terrorists.
Cannibals, yeah, and Roland gets killed and eaten and cooked into this mad sort of mix of animal and human stew or whatever, and his wife ends up eating probably her husband. But I love all that weirdness, that weird imagery in that last section.
Yeah, I'd say that was the most weirdly, even though there's still things that you're not really sure what's happening, like the exchange of the kind of the women near the end,
right?
And then the shootout, the kind of suddenly becomes an action film, even though they're not really sure why that's all happening. I found that probably one of the most coherent part of the film, where you can kind of follow, what kind of happens through that stage. I wasn't quite. I guess I wasn't expecting the kind of the animal killing. Like
Right.
I was a bit. I had to like. Went back a few times. Cause I'm like, is that? Am I? I wasn't sure. Cause I'm like, that looks pretty real. But like, is it real, or is it that way? But because it looked a little bit fake when the mallet comes down in the pig. But yeah, I think it's real animal slaughter. But yeah, and there was a few bits of that. So I guess that was kind of a weird and kind of weirdly prophetic, I suppose, of the cannibal films. Literally, we're dealing with cannibals, and we get to like a cannibal holocaust and stuff like that, and that's all kind of in there. It's like almost like that's kind of prophesizing what will be that genre,
Yeah, I mean, you've seen Breathless, right? What's your kind of quick thoughts on that in terms of a take on Godard?
I was trying to remember it. It's been a while since I've seen it. But I remember quite enjoying that quite a bit. I remember the characters being kind of maybe unlikable a little bit, but am I right in saying that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Right.
But yeah, this one felt different.
Okay, right. I mean, yeah. So the types of story techniques we're talking about here, the sort of complete rejection of mainstream kind of standard storytelling. Like, how do you respond to that in general? Is this just like taking it too far, or do you kind of are you completely opposed to that?
It's like you can see lines from this to things like that Lars von Trier's done, and like things like Gummo, things like, you can see lines from there to this.
Right.
From this to Gummo and things, so you can see that where it's maybe not, maybe inspiration, whatever, maybe technique has been taken forward. But I do quite like that type of thing. It doesn't usually grate me the wrong way. I think, what was it here? I think it's similar to, I don't know if you saw, and this, I don't think people raved about this film, but I didn't like it. But do you see, is it Uncut Gems, the film?
Oh yes, I loved it.
Yeah, right. So yeah, right. I couldn't stand it. Like,
right.
It's and I know, and I've read a little bit about the directors that did that, and that's kind of their style is to kind of it's agitate the audience,
chaos,
right? And give anxiety. And that's all I felt during that whole film. I wasn't sure, like I could never quite hear all the dialogue necessarily, because it wasn't necessarily made that way, and a lot of stuff happens, and then it has had quite a maybe satisfying ending potentially, but not for me, not the experience I had of that film, right? Like I could have been satisfied with that ending fine if I had been satisfied with the rest of the film, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But the rest of the film just gave me such agita that I was just like, I didn't get anything from it, and this gave me the same feeling, right? Whereas something like Gummo or something else which has like kind of non-conventional storytelling, or non-linear storytelling, I feel like you can usually sit within those vignettes and enjoy them fine, as they are, and not worry about the rest of the film, and when we come to the next part or whatever, I'm okay with that. Whereas this, I didn't feel comfortable in any of the scenarios,
right,
enough to be able to at least enjoy the acting or the cinematography or anything like that.
Okay.
It felt like it was just keeping me on edge, and I think that continual horn in the traffic jam was maybe what it was, and it's early on, but I think that might have been what killed it. Even,
right.
and the music swelling with the character talking, I was a bit annoyed about that, but it seemed a bit an odd choice. But I was like, okay, I'm still cool. I can still go with this. You know, it's we'll see where it goes. And then that happened, and I was like,
right.
like, when how long is this film? No, like, but I got there was, and I think that's what it was, because it would come across like a scenario, and I would think, okay, right, here's where I get some, I don't know, something that appeals to me maybe in this little vignette of, you know, not necessarily storytelling, or maybe it's performance, whatever. But I never really got there. The closest I think I got was the kind of Alice in Wonderland scene with the girl and the guy dressed up as characters, and again, like, when they start to refer to them as like being in a film, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of a cool, I quite like that, and then they burn her at the end. We don't kind of see it, but then we see it later on. All that kind of stuff I kind of liked. That was probably the closest I felt like I got to something that was for me, maybe. You know?
Yeah, the traffic jam scene is probably the film's most famous and iconic scene. I don't know how long it is. Feels like 10 minutes or something.
So
And it feels like shot as if it's like one tracking shot. I think there's a few cuts in there. But I think that's just like an incredible scene.
And don't get me wrong, it's so well shot. When I was thinking about them doing it, and you know, and the setup for it all is insane. Like, honestly, like, well, like, that's what I say. Like, it's put together so well, but it's still just you know, gave me, I don't know, just anxiety about the whole thing, and it didn't. I wasn't enjoying watching it.
Right,
Like,
okay.
I wasn't like even you know, after it happened and they drove away, I'm like, you know, you see the punchline, and I'm like, wow, that's like a huge set piece to put together with all those cars and all those different performers. And I guess I just didn't find that I was getting to take that in because of all the noise and the.
Right, interesting. I think I don't fully. This film doesn't really make me anxious. I think because of there's no emotional attachment to anything happening. That's intentionally distanced from the characters are two dimensional, not likable. You ever seen Mother by Darren Aronofsky?
No, I've never seen it.
Right. Now that's a film that did make me feel like as if it was unwatchable and uncomfortable, and I was extremely anxious. They sort of set up that film as like a couple have a house in the country and people just keep coming to the door and don't leave. So I do sometimes have that reaction, but I think with this one, yeah, it's just that there's just an intellectual reaction, not an emotional one for me. But another scene I love is the scene with the Mozart piano sonata.
Oh yes,
this is a scene sort of in a sort of farmyard courtyard. You just have a guy playing Mozart's piano sonata number 18, and just a lot of characters round about like farm workers, the two main characters, and I think the shot is just from the centre and it's just a 360-degree pan. I thought I love that scene, absolutely brilliant. Don't really know why. Just quite cool.
It's like the traffic jam scene is really well put together.
Right, aye.
And I get, like, I mean, that scene didn't, like, so I think I'm getting to maybe where I'm coming up with this film, because that scene is great as well, and I love all the you know, the kind of the supporting actors, you know, the characters and everything, and you know, the actual production value for the scene is really cool. It's like quite a cool looking farm, right? You know, and there's a lot of kind of stuff being said by the guy that's playing the piano that I quite like and stuff. But I think it's the main characters or who we're with, and I don't use, not having likable characters doesn't bother me, but having no emotional attachment or feeling about the characters at all.
Yeah.
I think that might be what it is, because by the time we get to that traffic jam scene, I know I keep coming back to that, and I do think that it's the most famous scene because that's all that people can fucking remember from the film when it's but we get to there, and it's I don't have any thought about the characters one way or another. You know, I've not got any investment, whether it be I want them to fail, I want them to succeed in any manner, right? Now, I think I usually get that even when, like, you know, I think I can usually pull something because of a scene or whatever that I've seen, but I think because I just don't feel that we've earned anything with them, and you're saying you don't have any emotional attachment to them, but that might be why I have the anxiety, because I'm waiting for
Right.
something
Okay.
in maybe for it. And when we get to that farmyard scene, it's like they're just standing with a face on. I
Yeah.
mean, like Roland's like just cannot be fucked, and like, who's that prick playing the piano? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like Corinne just kind of at one point just randomly appears somewhere else, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. What's happening? You know, I'm kind of like, is this going somewhere? And it's like, no, she just comes back.
Right. Okay.
And I don't know, like, as I say, usually it doesn't. I never thought that from films that I've seen like this, that I was getting an emotional attachment for the characters, but I must get some in that I've not
Right.
got from
Okay.
this.
Um.
You know, the way it's
Yeah.
presented.
Yeah. A couple of things. I think the main it's a critique of the main couple. So they're intentionally vacuous and they're only interested in money, and they have no moral center. They just want to kill each other.
I feel that they have no personality either. I mean,
Aye, but that's also the kind of a Brechtian device of not wanting you to relate to the characters. So I know what you mean, because it can work both ways, because like it does, it's meant to distance you from the film, but then it just makes you kind of like, I don't care at the same time. But I think it's been a challenge because you've went to the most of Godard's 60s films. This is like the most challenging one to watch, and you went from the easiest one to the hardest one. And when I was going through Godard's filmography, they're usually the first time I didn't like them, and then just like I kept just going back, and then eventually came to love them all.
And it feels like kind of for me, kind of going against what you say that you love. Sorry, like, so you said you love in film, you love when it surprises you and it goes places you're not seeing it, right? And I enjoy that as well, don't get me wrong, but in this case it feels like, even with the way you're talking, knowing what the film is going to be almost made you like it more, or made you enjoy it. If you're saying the first time you watched it you didn't necessarily enjoy it, not this necessarily, but like in general, that when you were going through the filmography, and it wasn't until maybe a second watch, when presumably you know what's going to happen, that you then found some love for it. And I'm wondering if that might be the same for me if I were to watch this again. And I'm just, that's a bit of I guess a weird, a wee bit of a contradiction in that, if you know what I mean. Because I know that's not the same for every film, but just for these ones,
because they are so radical and like antagonistic, and not what you expect as an audience member watching a movie. So I think
I'm wondering if I might get more out of it knowing what's at least.
If you go through Godard's 60s films in order, you can see the progression. They just get more challenging and weirder and weirder.
I really don't want to slam it, because I mean, I was looking up afterwards and I'm like, oh my god, like it's really highly regarded, but it just didn't do it for me. But was this film received when it was first released and things, or?
It's a good question. I was reading earlier in the booklet for the Criterion film. It said it sold 67,000 tickets in Paris.
Right.
I'm like, is that a lot or not? I don't know.
In the 60s, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think my knowledge of Godard's output, what happened with the French New Wave was like, there was such a revelation, because the first few films, like Francois Truffaut's 400 Blows, Breathless, they came out and they were critical and commercial hits. But within a few years, they were no longer drawing audiences to the same degree. So I think by the time you get to this, I don't think this would have been a big commercial hit at all, really. So, but I don't know its critical response. I couldn't really answer that. But
no, I just wondered, like, how if it's grown in love, the love for it has grown over the years, or if it was just as well thought of when it was released.
Yeah, I think probably what's interesting about the film is like how of its time it is. It's like Godard has his finger on the pulse, like there's the video essay on the Criterion disc is talking about how Godard's filmmaking. He talks about how he's always making films, like he's always making them in his head, like just taking in like everything that's happening in the world. So like, and he made 15 films in 7 years through the 60s. So he was like constantly on top of like popular culture. And this film was so of its time. I think probably at the time it was a bit shocking, like you know, the political statements it was making were to come through the late 60s and 70s. So I think maybe it was a wee bit ahead of its time, potentially.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of maybe not actual violence, although the animal stuff, but implied like violence as well. Like, you know, in very kind of, you know, everyone's kind of apathetic to it. You know, like doesn't, you know, think about the woman with her husband or whatever, our partner is killed in the car by the tractor. You know, and it's kind of played off for comedy. Eventually, you know, it's kind of or a little the whole way through. But you know, there's quite a lot of that. There's a lot of blood in this film. Like, you know, for a not a horror film, right? It's like, you know, so it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, I mean, definitely, I think it is a challenging film. I think it's worth people seeing if they are interested in this type of film. I wish I had better reaction to it. I would like to revisit it again in the future and see if I have any changed feelings towards it. But I'm glad you like it, Gary.
Yeah, there's a quote or an intertitle at the start of the film. It says, "A film found in a dump."
Oh, yes.
You'd be like, "Oh, I should have left it there, man."
No, not at all. Not at all. Who knew that, you know, all these years later you were going to like it, so that's fine. But no, I must say that did appeal to me as well. Those the intertitles were quite cool. I like the look and feel of those as well.
They
were good.
An interesting one, referring back to Breathless, one that just says "jump cut."
Yes,
poking fun at himself and tongue in cheek.
Cool.
Okay, well, that will do it for our discussion of Weekend. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, like the video, and hit the notification bell.
Thanks for listening. I've been Simon.
I've been Gary.
Keep it extreme.